The howling wind swallowed Victoria Everett's scream as she stumbled, her hand clutching her younger sister's frozen fingers. The endless sea of white stretched before them, each snowflake another needle against their skin, each gust of wind a knife slicing through their tattered coats. They were going to die out here, and Victoria knew it. "Delia, we have to keep moving," Victoria shouted over the roar of the blizzard, pulling her 17-year-old sister forward. Though only 20 herself, Victoria had learned early that survival meant never stopping, especially not now, with nightfall approaching, and their pursuers potentially still on their trail. Delia Everett nodded weakly, her once vibrant auburn hair now frozen in matted clumps around her pale face. "I'm trying, Vicky," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling storm. "But I can't feel my feet anymore." It had been 3 days since they'd fled their stepfather's ranch outside Marysville, California. 3 days of trudging through the unexpected early winter blizzard that had descended upon the Sierra Nevada foothills with merciless fury. The winter of 1868 had come early and with vengeance, as if nature itself sought to punish them for daring to escape. Victoria adjusted the small pack on her shoulder all they had managed to take. A few pieces of jerky remained, along with a water flask now frozen solid. The gold locket containing their mother's portrait hung around Victoria's neck. The only piece of her they had left after consumption had taken her just months ago. "We promised each other," Victoria reminded her sister, forcing strength into her voice that she didn't feel. "No matter what, we wouldn't go back, not after what he did." Their stepfather, Morton Pierce, had seemed a salvation when he married their widowed mother 3 years ago. A cattle rancher with a sprawling property, he had offered security to a woman with 2 daughters and dwindling prospects. But after their mother's death, his true nature emerged: the heavy hand, the leering looks, and finally, the night he'd come to Delia's room. Victoria had intervened, striking him with an oil lamp that left him unconscious, but not before he'd promised to break them proper once he recovered. They'd fled that same night, taking only what they could carry, planning to reach the town of North San Juan where their mother's cousin lived. But the unexpected blizzard had disoriented them completely. "Vicky," Delia's voice cracked as she stumbled again, this time falling to her knees in the deep snow. "I don't think I can. You can and you will," Victoria snapped, hauling her sister back to her feet. "Look, there are trees ahead. Maybe we can find shelter." The stand of pines in the distance offered their only hope, a dark smudge against the relentless white. Victoria wrapped her arm around her sister's waist, half dragging her toward the promise of minimal protection. Her own limbs felt like lead, her thoughts increasingly sluggish as hypothermia began its insidious work. "Tell me again about San Francisco," Delia murmured, her words slurring slightly as Victoria propelled them forward. "About the ships and the sea." It was a game they'd played since childhood, imagining the grand coastal city they'd only heard about in stories. A place where women could find respectable work and independence, far from the hardscrabble existence of the mining towns and cattle ranches. "The bay shines like beaten gold at sunset," Victoria began, reciting the description from a newspaper article she'd once read. "Ladies in fine silk dresses promenade along the waterfront, and ships from China and the Sandwich Islands unload exotic treasures daily." Delia stumbled again, and this time Victoria couldn't keep her upright. They both collapsed into the snow, the cold immediately seeping through their sodden skirts. "Just a minute," Delia whispered, her blue-tinged lips barely moving. "I just need a minute to rest." Terror gripped Victoria's heart. She knew what happened to people who rested in snowstorms. "No, Delia, no resting. We have to reach those trees." but her own body betrayed her, refusing to rise. The cold had seeped into her bones, turning her limbs to stone. The howling of the wind seemed almost musical now, a lullaby beckoning her toward sleep. "I'm sorry, Mama," Victoria whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks as she clutched her sister's limp hand. "I tried." The darkness at the edges of her vision began to close in, the white world narrowing to a pinpoint. In that moment, Victoria thought she heard something beyond the wind, the crunch of snow under hooves, perhaps. A hallucination, surely. No one would be out in such a storm. Then a shadow fell across them, larger than life. Victoria struggled to focus as a figure dismounted from a horse, approaching through the swirling snow. A man, broad-shouldered and tall, his face obscured by a scarf and the brim of a Stetson. "Sweet mercy," a deep voice exclaimed. "What in tarnation are you doing out here?" Victoria tried to speak, to warn her sister, but her lips wouldn't cooperate. The stranger knelt beside them, pulling off a glove to press warm fingers against first Delia's neck, then her own. "Still alive, thank God," he muttered. "But barely." With surprising gentleness, the man gathered Delia into his arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Victoria wanted to protest, to reach for her sister, but could only watch as he carried Delia to his horse, securing her somehow before returning. "Your turn, miss," he said, kneeling beside Victoria again. "Can you hear me?" Victoria managed the slightest nod. "I'm Daniel Quincy," he said, his voice steady and calm as he gathered her into his arms. "And I'm going to get you and your sister somewhere warm. I promise you that." The world tilted as he lifted her, and Victoria caught a glimpse of his face as the wind momentarily cleared, strong-jawed, with eyes the color of the summer sky. Then darkness claimed her completely. Her last conscious thought a prayer that this stranger was indeed a rescuer, and not something worse. Daniel Quincy had seen his share of death in his 30 years, but finding two young women nearly buried in snow during the worst blizzard in recent memory ranked among the most disturbing sights. He'd almost missed them entirely, would have if his horse Samson hadn't shied and refused to continue on their planned route. Now, with one unconscious woman draped across his saddle and the other clutched against his chest, Daniel urged Samson forward through the blinding snow, grateful beyond measure for the horse's unerring sense of direction. His cabin lay less than a mile ahead, but in this weather it might as well have been 10. "Steady, boy," he encouraged the struggling horse. "Almost home." The younger woman, hardly more than a girl, hadn't stirred since he'd found them, her skin an alarming shade of blue beneath the snow that crusted her eyelashes and hair. The older one had at least shown signs of consciousness before slipping under, which gave him hope. Daniel had been returning from Marysville with supplies when the storm hit, far earlier in the season than anyone had expected. November blizzards weren't unheard of in the foothills, but this one had descended with unusual ferocity, as if spring had surrendered to winter without autumn's usual mediation. He shifted the woman in his arms, trying to share what body heat he could through his heavy coat. She was slender but not slight, with high cheekbones and a determined set to her jaw even in unconsciousness. Her companion, who he guessed might be her sister given their similar features, appeared younger and more delicate. What madness had driven them out into such weather? Daniel wondered. Whatever the reason, it had nearly cost them their lives. Relief flooded him as the dark outline of his cabin finally emerged through the curtain of snow. Smoke still rose from the chimney, evidence that the fire he'd banked that morning hadn't completely died. Maneuvering Samson close to the porch, Daniel dismounted awkwardly, careful not to drop his burden. "Just a moment, miss," he murmured to the unconscious woman as he propped her temporarily against the cabin wall. Working quickly, He managed to lift the younger woman from the saddle, carrying her inside first and depositing her on his bed before returning for the older sister. Once both women were inside, Daniel stoked the fire to blazing life, adding several logs from his ample woodpile. The warmth began to permeate the single-room cabin, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. Both women were in the advanced stages of hypothermia, their wet clothes leaching away what little body heat remained. Daniel had spent 4 years as a medic during the war, enough to know what needed to be done, though the prospect made him uncomfortable. These were respectable-looking young women, not battlefield casualties. "No help for it," he muttered, reaching for the buttons on the older sister's coat. "Forgive me, miss, but those wet things will kill you sure as any bullet." Working with clinical efficiency, Daniel removed their outer garments, averting his eyes as much as possible while replacing soaked clothing with his own clean flannel shirts and wool socks. He arranged them in his bed, piling every available blanket over them before heating water for hot bricks to place at their feet. Only when he'd done everything possible did Daniel allow himself to collapse into the single chair by the fire, exhaustion overtaking him as the adrenaline ebbed. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault, the wind howling around the eaves like a living thing. Samson had been led into the lean-to shelter adjoining the cabin, protesting only slightly at sharing the space with Daniel's milk cow. Daniel studied the women as the firelight played across their features. They were undoubtedly sisters, both with the same auburn hair, though the older one's was darker, more chestnut than red. Their faces held a similarity of bone structure, though the older sister's features were more defined, more commanding even in repose. Around the older woman's neck, he'd noticed a gold locket which he'd carefully left in place. A family heirloom, perhaps. Certainly, they carried little else of value, just a small pack with the remnants of what looked like a hasty departure. Running from something or someone, Daniel concluded. It wasn't uncommon in these parts. The aftermath of the war, the flood of prospectors still chasing California gold dreams gone sour, and the general lawlessness of frontier territories created plenty of situations a person might need to escape. The younger sister moaned softly, her eyelids fluttering though she didn't wake. Daniel moved to check her pulse, relieved to find it stronger than before. Her skin, while still pale, had lost that alarming bluish tinge. "You're safe now," he said quietly, though he doubted she could hear him. "Both of you, rest easy." Returning to his chair, Daniel resigned himself to a night of vigilance. The blizzard showed no signs of abating, which meant they were all trapped together for the foreseeable future. Whatever their story, it would have to wait until they were strong enough to tell it. For now, it was enough that they were alive. Victoria surfaced slowly from darkness, awareness returning in fragments. Warmth surrounded her, a shocking contrast to her last memories of bone-deep cold. The scent of wood smoke filled her nostrils, along with something else, coffee brewing perhaps, and the faint smell of clean cotton. A blanket weighed heavily across her body, and beneath it, she realized she was wearing unfamiliar clothing, rough spun but soft against her skin. Panic surged through her as memory returned. The blizzard, Delia collapsing, a stranger finding them. She forced her eyes open, blinking against the unexpected brightness of daylight streaming through a small window. "Delia." The word emerged as a croak, her throat parched. "Your sister's right beside you, miss. She's still sleeping, but her color's better." Victoria turned her head toward the deep voice, finding the man from her fragmented memories sitting in a chair nearby, whittling something from a piece of wood. In the clear light of day, she could see him properly, tall and broad-shouldered as she'd first thought, with dark blonde hair that curled slightly where it brushed his collar. His face was tanned and weathered, with lines at the corners of eyes that were indeed the color of summer skies. Not a young man, but not old either, perhaps 30 or so, with an air of quiet competence. "You saved us," Victoria said, her voice stronger now. He nodded, setting aside his carving. "Found you both nearly buried in snow. Another hour and—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Victoria understood. Death had been minutes away. "I'm Daniel Quincy," he continued, moving to pour water from a pitcher into a tin cup. "And you're in my cabin about 5 miles northeast of Marysville. Storm's still blowing something fierce outside." Victoria struggled to sit up, relief washing through her as she confirmed Delia was indeed beside her, breathing steadily, her face peaceful in sleep. "I'm Victoria Everett. This is my sister, Delia." She accepted the water he offered, drinking greedily before continuing. "Thank you, Mr. Quincy. We owe you our lives." "Daniel, please," he corrected gently. "And you don't owe me anything. Couldn't very well leave you out there." He paused, studying her with careful consideration. "Though I am wondering what drove 2 young ladies out into such weather on foot." Victoria's guard instantly rose. For all his kindness, this man was still a stranger, and their stepfather had connections throughout the county. "We were traveling to North San Juan," she said carefully, "to visit family. The storm caught us by surprise." Daniel's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes told Victoria he recognized the half-truth. "North San Juan's a good 20 miles from where I found you, and in the opposite direction from Marysville. Strange route to take." Victoria looked away, unable to meet his steady gaze. "We got turned around in the storm." "I see." Daniel didn't press further, instead moving toward a small stove where a pot bubbled. "You must be hungry. I've got stew that's almost ready." The mention of food made Victoria's stomach growl audibly, reminding her they'd had nothing but jerky for days. "Thank you," she said, then hesitated, glancing down at the oversized flannel shirt she wore. "Did you?" A flush crept up Daniel's neck. "Had to get you both out of those wet things, or you'd have never warmed up. I was a medic during the war, tried to be as proper as circumstances allowed." He cleared his throat. "Your clothes are drying by the fire. They should be ready by tomorrow." Victoria felt her own cheeks warm but nodded. The alternative had been death, after all. "I understand. Thank you for your discretion." A soft moan from beside her interrupted any further conversation as Delia began to stir, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal eyes the same hazel as Victoria's own. "Vicky." Delia's voice was weak, confused. "Where?" "We're safe, Del," Victoria assured her, squeezing her sister's hand. "This is Mr. Quincy Daniel. He found us in the storm and brought us to his cabin." Delia's gaze drifted to Daniel, who had moved back to give the sisters space. "You carried us," she said, recognition dawning. "I remember. Feeling someone lift me. I thought I was dreaming." "No dream, miss," Daniel replied with a gentle smile. "Though finding you both out there in that blizzard was certainly a strange turn of events." Delia struggled to sit up, and Victoria helped her, noting with relief that her sister's strength seemed to be returning. "How long have we been here?" Delia asked. "Since yesterday afternoon," Daniel answered, returning to the stove to stir the stew. "It's just past noon now. Storm still raging, but the cabin's solid. We've got plenty of firewood and food to wait it out." Victoria and Delia exchanged a worried glance. Every hour they remained in one place increased the chance that their stepfather would find them once the weather cleared. Morton Pierce was not a man to let go of what he considered his property easily. "How long do these storms usually last?" Victoria asked, keeping her tone casual. Daniel shrugged. "Hard to say. This one came early in the season and hit harder than most. Could be another day, could be 3. He ladled stew into bowls, bringing them over on a small tray along with chunks of cornbread. Best to settle in and not worry about it. Nothing to be done until it passes. The sisters accepted the food gratefully, and for several minutes, the only sounds were those of eating and the crackling fire. The stew was simple, but hearty venison with carrots and potatoes, and Victoria couldn't remember anything ever tasting so good. "This is wonderful," Delia said, breaking the silence. "Did you hunt the deer yourself?" Daniel nodded. "Got lucky last month, smoked most of it for winter." He hesitated, then added, "I don't get many visitors out here. Tends to get lonely sometimes, especially in winter. You live here alone?" Victoria asked, curiosity getting the better of her caution. "Just me and Samson, my horse, and Bessie, the milk cow." A shadow crossed his face. "Had a wife once, but she and our baby girl died of fever 5 years back. After the war ended, couldn't stand being around too many people, so I came west and built this place." Victoria felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly. "We know something about that. Our mother passed earlier this year." "Consumption," Delia added quietly. "She was sick for months." Daniel nodded in understanding. "It's a hard country for women," he said. "Your father died in '63 at Gettysburg," Victoria replied. "He was with the 5th California." "I was Army of the Potomac myself," Daniel said. "Never crossed paths with the California regiments that I recall, but I heard they fought bravely." A comfortable silence fell, the shared understanding of loss creating an unexpected bond. Victoria found herself studying Daniel more carefully, the way he moved with economy and purpose, the gentle way he spoke to them, the absence of the leering looks they'd grown accustomed to from most men. "You mentioned you were a medic," Victoria said eventually. "Is that what you did before the war?" Daniel shook his head. "Apprenticed with a doctor in Ohio, but never finished my training. Learned enough in the field hospitals, though." His expression darkened momentarily. "More than enough." "And now," Delia asked, "do a bit of everything." "Some hunting and trapping, grow vegetables in summer. I break horses for the ranchers around Marysville sometimes. It's not much, but it's a living." He gestured around the small cabin. "Keeps me in coffee and ammunition at least." The cabin, though modest, was clean and well organized. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while the other held shelves of books surprising in number for a frontier home. The single bed they occupied sat in one corner, and Victoria now noticed a pallet made up near the fire where Daniel must have spent the night. A table with 2 chairs, a trunk, and a few hooks for clothing completed the sparse furnishings. "You have a lot of books," Delia observed, following Victoria's gaze. A smile transformed Daniel's face, softening the weathered lines. "Reading passes the winter months. I trade with the bookseller in Marysville whenever I can. You're welcome to borrow any that interest you while you're here." The genuine warmth in his offer touched Victoria. It had been a long time since anyone had shown them simple kindness without expectation of something in return. "Thank you," she said, then hesitated before adding, "Mr. Quincy Daniel, I haven't been entirely truthful about why we were traveling." Delia shot her a worried look, but Victoria gave a slight shake of her head. They needed allies, and her instincts told her Daniel Quincy could be trusted. "I figured as much," Daniel replied evenly. "2 young women don't generally wander into blizzards without good reason." Victoria took a deep breath. "We were running away from our stepfather in Marysville. After our mother died, he changed." She couldn't bring herself to elaborate further. Understanding darkened Daniel's eyes. "Say no more, Miss Everett. I can guess the rest." He stood, moving to add another log to the fire. "For what it's worth, I doubt anyone will be searching in this weather, and even if they were, they'd never find this place unless they knew exactly where to look." Relief coursed through Victoria. Thank you. Does that mean you'll help us get to North San Juan when the storm clears? Delia asked hopefully. Daniel considered this. If that's still where you want to go, though I should warn you, North San Juan's a mining town with not much to offer two young ladies. Your family, they're there expecting you. Victoria exchanged a glance with Delia. Our mother's cousin lives there. Or at least she did, 3 years ago when we last had word. We don't have many options. A frown creased Daniel's brow. Well, we've got time to figure something out while the storm blows itself out. For now, you both should rest. Your bodies took quite a beating from the cold. As if to emphasize his point, Victoria felt exhaustion wash over her again, the simple act of eating and talking having drained her limited reserves. Delia, too, was fighting to keep her eyes open. Perhaps you're right, Victoria conceded, settling back against the pillows. As she drifted towards sleep, Victoria was vaguely aware of Daniel moving quietly around the cabin, adding wood to the fire, checking on something outside, and finally settling in his chair with a book. For the first time in months, she felt truly safe. The blizzard raged for 3 more days, confining them to the snug interior of the cabin. During that time, a cautious friendship developed between Daniel and the Everett sisters. As their strength returned, Victoria and Delia insisted on helping with the daily chores, cooking, mending, and tending to the few animals sheltered in the lean-to. Daniel proved to be a man of hidden depths. Though quiet by nature, he possessed a dry wit that frequently surprised laughter from the sisters. In the evenings, he read aloud from his collection Dickens and Twain and volumes of poetry that Victoria wouldn't have expected a frontier horseman to appreciate. On the 4th morning, Victoria woke to unusual silence. The howling wind that had been their constant companion had finally ceased. She slipped from bed, careful not to wake Delia, and moved to the window. Outside, the world had been transformed. Snow blanketed everything in pristine white, drifts reaching halfway up the cabin walls in places. The sky above was a clear, brilliant blue, and sunlight sparkled off the snow with almost painful brightness. The door opened, admitting Daniel and a blast of cold air. He stamped snow from his boots, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. "Storm's finally broken," he announced, catching sight of Victoria. "Though we won't be going anywhere for a day or two, drifts are chest-high in places." Victoria nodded, a strange mixture of relief and disappointment washing over her. Relief that they would remain safe a while longer, disappointment that their time in this unexpected sanctuary was coming to an end. "I've been thinking about your situation," Daniel continued, hanging his coat on a hook. "North San Juan might not be your best option." "Oh." Victoria moved to pour them both coffee from the pot keeping warm on the stove. "Mining towns are rough places, especially in winter when the work slows. And if your cousin isn't there anymore." He accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "I know a place in Nevada City that might suit better. The widow who runs the millinery shop was saying just last month she needed help. Respectable work for ladies, and she has rooms above the shop where her assistants can board." Victoria considered this. Nevada City was farther from Marysville than North San Juan, which would put additional distance between them and Morton. And millinery work sounded far more appealing than the limited options they might find in a smaller mining settlement. "That's very kind of you to suggest," she said carefully. "But why would this widow take in 2 strangers on your recommendation?" Daniel smiled. "Mrs. Holloway patched me up last year when I took a fall from a half-broke Mustang. She's a good woman with a soft spot for those in need. If I vouch for you both, she'll at least give you a chance." From the bed, Delia stirred. "Did I hear something about a millinery shop?" she asked sleepily. "Vicky," Remember how Mama taught us to trim hats? She always said you had a gift for it." Victoria nodded, memories surfacing of peaceful afternoons spent learning the intricacies of ribbon and feather arrangement from their mother, who had worked as a milliner's assistant before her marriage. "It seems almost too perfect," Victoria admitted, turning back to Daniel. "Why are you doing all this for us?" Daniel's expression grew serious. "Because someone should have done it for my Sarah." At Victoria's questioning look, he continued, "My wife. Before we met, she was in a situation not unlike yours. Ran away from home at 16 to escape her father's heavy hand. Ended up in far worse circumstances before I found her." He stared into his coffee cup. Always wished someone had helped her sooner. The simple honesty of his admission touched Victoria deeply. In that moment, she realized how much her opinion of Daniel Quincy had evolved in just a few days. From stranger to rescuer to friend, and now there was something else, something she wasn't quite ready to examine. "Then we accept your help and gratefully," Victoria said, pushing away confusing thoughts. "When do you think we might be able to travel? Weather holds. We could make Nevada City in 2 days' time once the drifts settle enough for the horses. I've got an old mare gentle enough for you two to ride double." Delia had fully awakened now and joined them at the table. "You'd take us all the way to Nevada City yourself?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. "Wouldn't be right to send you ladies off alone, especially not after." Daniel gestured vaguely, leaving unspoken the reference to their stepfather. "Besides, I need to make the trip to Nevada City anyway, running low on some supplies that can't be had in Marysville." Victoria suspected this last part might be an excuse, but she didn't challenge it. The prospect of Daniel's continued protection was too comforting to question. "Then it's settled," she declared, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach when Daniel's eyes met hers. "We'll leave as soon as the snow allows." In the days that followed, they prepared for the journey. Daniel hunted rabbits for fresh meat and showed the sisters how to prepare jerky for the trip. Victoria mended their clothes, which had been badly damaged during their flight through the wilderness. Delia, who had always been skilled with a needle, altered one of Daniel's old shirts into a more suitable garment for herself, her own blouse being beyond repair. Throughout these domestic activities, Victoria found herself increasingly aware of Daniel's presence, the breadth of his shoulders as he chopped wood, the gentleness of his hands as he treated a cut on Delia's finger, the rich timbre of his voice as he told stories of his travels after the war. She caught herself watching him when he wasn't looking, only to glance away quickly when he turned in her direction. One evening, as Delia slept soundly in the bed, Victoria sat by the fire darning a sock. Daniel entered from checking on the animals, bringing with him the crisp scent of night air. "Stars are out," he remarked quietly, settling into the chair opposite her. "Thousands of them, always look bigger after a storm." Victoria set aside her mending. "I'd like to see." Daniel seemed momentarily surprised, then nodded, reaching for his coat and hers. "Won't be for long." Still bitter cold out there. Wrapped in their coats, they stepped onto the small porch. The night was indeed breathtaking, a vast canopy of stars spread across the inky blackness, more than Victoria had ever seen. The snow reflected their light, giving the landscape an ethereal glow. "It's beautiful," she breathed, her words forming white clouds in the frigid air. "Worth nearly freezing for," Daniel agreed, standing close beside her. "Used to show Sarah the constellations on nights like this. She loved the stories behind them." Victoria glanced at him, noting the way the starlight softened his features. "You must have loved her very much." "I did." His gaze remained on the stars. "Thought I'd never feel anything again after losing her and our little girl, just went numb inside." That's partly why I came out here, wasn't trying to live, just exist. And now, Victoria asked softly. Daniel turned to her then, his eyes reflecting the starlight. Now I'm remembering what it feels like to be alive, to care. His voice dropped lower, to want things again. The intensity of his gaze sent warmth coursing through Victoria despite the cold. She should look away, she knew, but found herself unable to break the connection between them. Daniel, the moment shattered as the door creaked open behind them. Vicky, Mr. Quincy. Delia's voice was thick with sleep. Is everything all right? Victoria stepped back quickly, suddenly aware of how close she and Daniel had been standing. Just looking at the stars, Del. We're coming back in now. As they filed back into the warmth of the cabin, Victoria caught Daniel's gaze once more. Something had shifted between them tonight, something neither of them had put into words but both had felt. The question was what to do about it, with Nevada City and separation looming just days away. The journey to Nevada City began 2 days later, with the snow packed enough to allow travel. Daniel had fashioned a makeshift sledge to carry their few belongings, hitched behind Samson. The sisters rode double on the elderly mare as Daniel had suggested, while he led the way on foot, breaking trail through the snow. The first day passed without incident, though progress was slow. They made camp in a sheltered grove, Daniel efficiently setting up a small tent for the sisters while he prepared to sleep under the stars. "The cold doesn't bother you?" Delia asked as they shared a simple supper of jerky and hard biscuits. Daniel smiled. "Spent 2 winters with the Army of the Potomac. This California cold is nothing compared to Virginia in January." As darkness fell, Victoria found herself reluctant to retire to the tent, preferring to remain by the fire with Daniel. Delia, exhausted from the day's travel, had no such hesitation and soon bid them good night, leaving Victoria and Daniel alone. For several minutes, they sat in companionable silence, watching the flames dance. "What will you do after you've taken us to Nevada City?" Victoria finally asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind. Daniel poked at the fire with a stick. "Head back to my cabin, I suppose. Winter's a quiet time for me. Do some trapping, read my books." He glanced at her. "What about you, after you're settled at Mrs. Holloway's?" Victoria stared into the flames. "Learn the millinery trade properly. Save every penny. Eventually, maybe Delia and I could have our own shop somewhere." She hesitated. "Somewhere far from Marysville. You're afraid he'll come looking for you." It wasn't a question, but Victoria nodded anyway. "Morton Pierce is not a man who forgives being defied, and he has friends in the marshal's office." Daniel's expression hardened. "He'd have to find you first, and even then, he'd have to go through me." The fierce protectiveness in his voice warmed Victoria more than the fire. "You can't stand guard over us forever, Daniel." "Maybe not," he conceded. "But I can make sure you're settled safely, at least." He paused, seeming to debate with himself before continuing. "Victoria, there's something I've been meaning to ask." A sudden snap of a branch interrupted him, both of their heads turning sharply toward the sound. Daniel was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. "Probably just a deer," he said quietly, though his posture remained alert. "But I'll check." "Stay by the fire." Victoria watched anxiously as Daniel disappeared into the darkness beyond their camp. Long minutes passed before he returned, his expression grim. "Someone's been tracking us," he reported, keeping his voice low. "Found boot prints following our trail, recent ones." Fear clutched at Victoria's heart. "Morton? Can't say for certain, but I'd wager it's not a coincidence." Daniel began quickly gathering their belongings. "We need to move now." "But Delia, wake her. Quietly. We'll head toward Nevada City by a different route. There's an old trapper's cabin about 3 miles east of here. We can shelter there until morning." Victoria hurried to the tent, gently shaking Delia awake and explaining the situation in hushed tones. Within minutes, they had broken camp, leaving as little trace as possible of their presence. The night journey was tense, with Daniel constantly scanning their surroundings as they moved through the moonlit forest. The elderly mare, sensing their anxiety, moved nervously beneath the sisters, requiring Victoria's constant reassurance. They reached the trapper's cabin shortly before midnight, a crude structure even smaller than Daniel's own cabin, but sound enough to provide shelter. Daniel insisted on the sisters taking the single bunk inside while he kept watch from the doorway, rifle across his knees. "Do you really think it's him?" Delia whispered as they huddled beneath a musty blanket. "How could he have found us in this wilderness?" Victoria squeezed her sister's hand. "Morton knows these mountains better than most, and he has trackers who work for him, men who can follow trails days old. But why go to such trouble for us? We're nothing to him." Victoria didn't answer immediately. She had never told Delia the full truth about their stepfather's intentions, how he had spoken of breeding stock after their mother's death, his plans to marry Delia off to one of his ranch hands while keeping Victoria for himself. Some burdens were too heavy to share, even with a sister. "Pride," Victoria said finally. "We injured his pride when we ran, and men like Morton can't abide that." From his position at the door, Daniel spoke without turning. "Men like that consider women property, not people. In their minds, you've stolen something that belongs to them yourselves." The accuracy of his assessment surprised Victoria. "You sound like you've known such men, fought alongside them, been ordered by them, watched them destroy everything they touched." Daniel's voice was flat. "Your stepfather won't stop looking easily, but neither will I stop protecting you both." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, weighted with more meaning than the words themselves. Eventually, exhaustion claimed both sisters, and they drifted into uneasy sleep. Victoria's last conscious thought was of Daniel's silhouette in the doorway, steadfast and vigilant. Morning came with no sign of pursuit, but Daniel insisted they maintain caution. Their new route would take them over rougher terrain but would be harder to track. The day passed in tense silence, everyone listening for sounds that might indicate followers. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge that offered their first view of Nevada City in the valley, below a sprawling settlement larger than Victoria had expected, with proper streets and substantial buildings interspersed among the more typical frontier structures. "We'll reach town before nightfall," Daniel announced, relief evident in his voice. "Mrs. Holloway's shop is on Broad Street, near the center of town." As they descended toward Nevada City, Victoria found herself increasingly anxious, not about Morton's pursuit, but about the approaching separation from Daniel. Their time together had been brief but intense, creating a connection she hadn't anticipated. The thought of saying goodbye left an ache in her chest that she couldn't ignore. The town bustled with activity even as dusk approached, miners and merchants going about their business with the purposeful energy that characterized these western settlements. Victoria noticed immediately that Nevada City hosted more women and families than she would have expected in a mining town, giving it a more civilized air than many similar communities. Daniel led them directly to a neat two-story building with a painted sign proclaiming Holloway's Millinery and Fine Goods. Large windows displayed an array of fashionable hats and bonnets that would have looked at home in San Francisco or even New York. "Wait here," Daniel instructed, helping the sisters dismount before tying the horses to a hitching post. "Let me speak to Mrs. Holloway first." Victoria and Delia stood nervously on the boardwalk, acutely aware of their travel-worn appearance. After so many days in the wilderness, Victoria felt distinctly out of place among the relatively well-dressed women passing by. Daniel emerged from the shop several minutes later, accompanied by a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a shrewd expression. She surveyed the sisters with open curiosity. "So these are your young friends in need, Mr. Quincy," she said, her voice warm and slightly accented German, perhaps. "Come inside, girls. You look half frozen and entirely exhausted." Mrs. Holloway ushered them into the shop, which was blessedly warm after the chill outside. The interior smelled of fabric and tea, with a counter at one end, and displays of hats and bonnets arranged throughout the space. A young woman was just finishing with a customer, exchanging coins for a hat box tied with ribbon. "Eliza, mind the shop," Mrs. Holloway instructed the young woman before leading them through a door at the back and up a narrow staircase to a comfortable apartment above. "Sit, sit," she urged, gesturing to chairs around a small table. "I'll make tea." Once they were all seated with steaming cups before them, Mrs. Holloway fixed Daniel with a direct look. "Now, Mr. Quincy, explain to me again why these young ladies need employment and lodging so urgently." Daniel glanced at Victoria, who gave a slight nod, granting permission to share their story. "The Everett sisters are fleeing an abusive situation in Marysville," he explained simply. "Their stepfather is a dangerous man with connections. They need safe haven and honest work while they establish themselves." Mrs. Holloway's expression softened as she turned to Victoria. "Is this true, Miss Everett?" "Yes, madam," Victoria replied. "Our mother died this past year, and our stepfather, he made it impossible for us to remain. We have experience with sewing and hat trimming. Our mother taught us before her illness." Mrs. Holloway studied them both. "And you're being pursued?" Victoria hesitated. "We may be. We saw signs of someone tracking us on our journey here." This information seemed to decide something for the older woman. "Well then, you'll stay here at least for now. I have 2 rooms upstairs that my assistants use. Eliza has one, and the other has been empty since Miss Peterson married last spring." She eyed Delia speculatively. "You're rather young, but I suppose you can learn. Both of you will need proper clothing. Those garments have seen better days." Relief washed over Victoria. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. We'll work hard and won't disappoint you." "See that you don't," the older woman replied, though her eyes twinkled. "Mr. Quincy vouches for you, and he's not a man who gives his word lightly." She stood. "Let me show you to your room. You can wash up while I find something suitable for you to wear." As Mrs. Holloway led Delia upstairs, Victoria turned to Daniel, who had remained silent during the exchange. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Daniel nodded, his expression unreadable. "I should see to the horses," he said, rising, "and find lodging for myself tonight." "You're staying in town?" Victoria couldn't hide her surprise or her hope. "Just for tonight?" "Want to make sure you're both properly settled." He hesitated. "And there's still the matter of your stepfather. If he's tracked you this far, he might come into town looking." The reminder of the danger sobered Victoria. "Be careful, Daniel. Morton is not above violence." A ghost of a smile crossed Daniel's face. "Neither am I when necessary." He moved toward the door. "I'll come by in the morning to check on you both." After he left, Victoria sat alone at the table, emotions warring within her. Relief at finding safe harbor, fear that Morton might still find them, and beneath it all, a growing certainty that her feelings for Daniel Quincy had become far more complicated than gratitude. The room Mrs. Holloway provided was small but clean, with 2 narrow beds, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the street below. After weeks of hardship, it seemed luxurious to Victoria and Delia. "You think we'll be safe here?" Delia asked as they changed into the simple but well-made dresses Mrs. Holloway had provided cast-offs from previous assistants, but far better than their ruined garments. I think so, Victoria replied, though uncertainty lingered. Nevada City is much larger than I expected. It would be difficult for Morton to search the entire town. And Daniel will be nearby, at least for tonight, Delia added with a knowing glance at her sister. Victoria busied herself with arranging her hair to hide her blush. Mr. Quincy has been very kind to us. Kind? Delia raised an eyebrow. Vicky, the man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars, and don't pretend you haven't noticed. That's absurd, Victoria protested, though her heart quickened. He sees us as charges, nothing more, Delia snorted delicately. I may be younger than you, but I'm not blind. There's something growing between you two. The question is, what will you do about it? Before Victoria could formulate a response, a knock at the door announced Mrs. Holloway, who brought them down to a simple but hearty supper with herself and Eliza, the shop assistant. The older woman asked few questions about their past, focusing instead on their skills and experience with millinery work. We'll start you both tomorrow, she decided after hearing their descriptions of the hats they'd helped their mother create. Victoria in the shop with Eliza, and Delia in the workroom with me. I suspect you both have much to learn, but a good foundation is more than most bring to the trade. That night, despite her exhaustion, Victoria found sleep elusive. She stood at the window, gazing down at the quiet street, wondering where Daniel had found lodging and what tomorrow would bring. The thought of him returning to his solitary cabin filled her with an unexpected sadness. Morning came with the bustle of a town awakening. After a quick breakfast, Mrs. Holloway put both sisters to work immediately. Delia in the back room learning to block felt for winter hats, Victoria at the counter with Eliza, becoming familiar with the stock and prices. The morning passed quickly, with a steady stream of customers keeping Victoria occupied. She found herself enjoying the work more than expected, particularly the interactions with the varied clientele of Nevada City. From miners' wives to the more affluent spouses of successful businessmen, women of all stations came to Holloway's for their headwear needs. It was nearing midday when the shop bell jingled, announcing another customer. Victoria looked up with a practiced smile that faltered as Daniel entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. Mr. Quincy, she greeted him, conscious of Eliza's curious gaze. How may we assist you today? A hint of amusement crossed his face at her formal tone. Good morning, Miss Everett. I was hoping to speak with you briefly if Mrs. Holloway can spare you. Of course. Mrs. Holloway's voice came from the doorway to the back room. Take a few minutes, Victoria. Eliza can mind the counter. Daniel led Victoria outside onto the boardwalk, where they could speak privately yet remain in public view, a consideration for her reputation that Victoria appreciated. You look well, he said, studying her with evident approval. The work agrees with you. It does, Victoria admitted. Mrs. Holloway is strict but fair, and the shop is busy enough to be interesting. She hesitated. Have you found accommodations to your liking? Daniel nodded. The hotel down the street is comfortable enough, but that's not what I wanted to discuss. His expression grew serious. I rode out at first light to check the approaches to town, found fresh tracks coming in from the Marysville Road. Victoria's stomach clenched. Morton? Can't say for certain, but the boot prints matched those I saw trailing us. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her arm. Don't panic. Nevada City is large enough that finding you won't be simple, especially if you stay inside the shop as much as possible for the next few days. And Delia, same for her. I've spoken with the sheriff, an honest man from what I can tell. Didn't give him details, Just said there might be a man in town looking to cause trouble for two young women under Mrs. Holloway's protection. Victoria felt a surge of gratitude for his foresight. How long will you stay in Nevada City? Daniel's gaze held her steadily. That depends. On what? On whether there's reason for me to stay. His voice dropped lower. Or reason for me to come back after I've returned home. Victoria's heart beat faster at the implication. Daniel, the shop door opened abruptly as Eliza peered out. Victoria, Mrs. Holloway needs you. There's a lady wanting to order a special bonnet for her daughter's wedding. Daniel stepped back. Go on, we'll talk later. He settled his hat back on his head. I'll be keeping an eye on the shop just in case. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Victoria's mind divided between her duties and the constant awareness of potential danger. By closing time, her nerves were frayed from the strain of watching every unfamiliar face that entered the shop. Mrs. Holloway, perceptive as always, noticed her tension. Mr. Quincy told me about your concerns, she said as they closed up for the evening. You and your sister will stay upstairs tonight. Eliza and I will remain as well. Safety in numbers. Thank you, Victoria replied, touched by the woman's protectiveness. I hope it's unnecessary caution. Better unnecessary caution than necessary regret, Mrs. Holloway said firmly. Now help me check these locks. They had just finished securing the shop when a knock came at the front door. Mrs. Holloway peered through the curtained window, then relaxed. It's Mr. Quincy, she announced, unlocking the door to admit him. Daniel entered quickly, his expression tense. I saw him, he said without preamble. Morton Pierce. He's asking questions at the hotel about two auburn-haired sisters. Victoria's blood ran cold. Did he see you? No, I recognized him from your description and kept my distance. Daniel turned to Mrs. Holloway. Is there a back exit from this building? The older woman nodded. Through the workroom. It leads to the alley behind. Good. Daniel paced the small shop, thinking, here's what we'll do. Victoria and Delia stay upstairs tonight away from windows. Mrs. Holloway, if Pierce comes asking, you've never heard of the Everett sisters. I'll keep watch from across the street tonight. And tomorrow? Victoria asked, fear tightening her throat. Daniel's jaw set in determination. Tomorrow we end this, one way or another. The ominous tone of his words sent a shiver down Victoria's spine. What do you mean? I mean Morton Pierce needs to understand that pursuing you is more trouble than it's worth. Daniel's eyes held a cold fury that Victoria hadn't seen before. I won't let him threaten you or Delia anymore. Daniel, no. Victoria gripped his arm. I don't want you confronting him. He's dangerous. So am I. The quiet certainty in his voice was more frightening than any boast. But don't worry. I'm not planning violence unless he forces it. Mrs. Holloway, who had been listening silently, spoke up. Mr. Quincy, I believe my late husband's revolver is still in the drawer upstairs. It might be prudent to have it at hand. Daniel shook his head. Keep it for protection, but I have my own weapons. He turned back to Victoria. Trust me, I won't let him hurt either of you again. After extracting promises from both sisters to remain inside and away from windows, Daniel departed to take up his vigil across the street. Victoria watched from behind the curtain as his tall figure melted into the shadows of a recessed doorway, almost invisible but undoubtedly watching. That night was the longest of Victoria's life. She and Delia lay side by side in the darkness, speaking in whispers about their fears and hopes. You think he'll ever stop looking for us? Delia asked, her voice small in the darkness. Victoria sighed. Eventually. Men like Morton tire of games that don't quickly yield results. What about Daniel? Do you think he'll tire of us too? The question hit closer to Victoria's own fears than she cared to admit. Daniel is nothing like Morton, but he has his own life, his own home. We can't expect him to remain our protector forever. Delia was quiet for a moment. You love him, don't you? Victoria didn't answer immediately, the truth too new and fragile to voice aloud. It's complicated, she said finally. It's not, Delia countered. I've seen how you look at each other. And it's not complicated at all. Before Victoria could respond, a sound from the street below drew her attention. Cautiously, she moved to the window, peering out from behind the curtain. In the dim light of the street lamps, she could make out a figure she instantly recognized: Morton Pierce, his bulky frame unmistakable even in the shadows. Her stepfather stood across the street, apparently studying Holloway's millinery. A chill ran through Victoria as she realized he must have gotten information pointing him to this location. But where was Daniel? She couldn't see him in his previous position. As if summoned by her thoughts, a second figure materialized from the darkness beside Morton. Even from a distance, Victoria recognized Daniel's tall form. Words were exchanged, Morton's posture becoming aggressive while Daniel remained seemingly calm. "What's happening?" Delia whispered, joining her at the window. "Daniel is confronting Morton," Victoria replied, her heart racing. "I can't hear what they're saying." The confrontation below escalated, Morton's voice rising though the words remained indistinct. Suddenly, he lunged forward, something glinting in his hand, a knife. Victoria realized with horror, but Daniel was quicker. He sidestepped the attack, then moved with the fluid precision of a trained fighter, disarming Morton and throwing him to the ground in one smooth motion. Even from her vantage point, Victoria could see her stepfather's surprise at being so efficiently overpowered. Daniel stood over the fallen man, saying something that made Morton's face contort with rage. Then, to Victoria's astonishment, Daniel stepped back, allowing Morton to rise. More words were exchanged, Daniel's posture unyielding. Finally, Morton spat on the ground, cast one last venomous look toward the millinery shop, and stalked away down the street. "He's leaving," Delia breathed, disbelieving. Morton's actually leaving. Victoria couldn't quite trust what she'd seen. For now, perhaps. But he's not a man to admit defeat easily. Across the street, Daniel remained motionless, watching until Morton disappeared from view. Then he glanced up toward their window, as if sensing their presence. Victoria stepped back instinctively, though she knew he couldn't see them in the darkness. A soft knock at the shop's back door some minutes later sent them hurrying downstairs, where Mrs. Holloway was already admitting Daniel. "It's done," he said simply, his knuckles bruised but his demeanor calm. "Pierce won't be bothering you anymore. How can you be sure?" Victoria asked, searching his face for signs of what had transpired. Daniel's expression was grim but satisfied. "Let's just say I made the consequences of continued pursuit extremely clear to him, including the fact that I've already filed statements with both the Nevada City Sheriff and the county judge detailing his abuse and threats." He paused. "And I might have mentioned that I know certain details about his cattle business that the territorial authorities would find interesting." Understanding dawned on Victoria. "You're blackmailing him." "I prefer to think of it as mutually assured destruction," Daniel replied with the ghost of a smile. "He leaves you alone. His less-than-legal business practices remain private. He comes near either of you again, I ensure he spends years in prison." "Will it work?" Delia asked doubtfully. "Men like Pierce only understand self-interest," Daniel said. "Once he realized pursuing you threatened his own freedom and fortune, the decision became simple." His expression softened as he looked at Victoria. "You're safe now, both of you." The simple declaration broke something inside Victoria. Tears she had held back for months through their mother's death, Morton's abuse, their desperate flight, and the constant fear finally escaped. Daniel crossed to her in 2 strides, pulling her gently into his arms as she sobbed against his chest. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "You're free." Mrs. Holloway quietly ushered Delia from the room, giving them privacy as Victoria's tears gradually subsided. "I'm sorry," she said, embarrassed as she pulled away slightly. "I don't usually." "Don't apologize," Daniel said, his hand coming up to brush a tear from her cheek. "You've been strong for so long, for Delia, for yourself. It's all right to let go now." Victoria looked up at him, suddenly acutely aware of how close they stood, of his hand still resting against her face. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Daniel's eyes, that remarkable summer blue, held her steadily. "That depends on you, Victoria. On me. I meant what I said earlier. About having a reason to stay or to come back." His voice dropped lower. "These past days with you and Delia, they've woken something in me I thought was long dead. The cabin doesn't seem like enough anymore, not when I think about returning to that solitude." Victoria's heart beat so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "What are you saying, Daniel?" "I'm saying I don't want to say goodbye to you." The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them back. "I know it's fast, probably too fast. We've known each other only days in extraordinary circumstances, but I feel—" He paused, searching for words. "I feel like I've found something I wasn't even looking for." The raw honesty in his voice moved Victoria deeply. "I feel it too," she admitted. "This connection between us. It frightens me how quickly it's grown." "It doesn't have to be decided tonight," Daniel said, his thumb gently tracing her cheekbone. "I can wait, however long you need." Victoria leaned into his touch. "And if I don't need long at all," a smile transformed his face, erasing the lines of tension. "Then I'd say we have some planning to do. Planning for the future. Your future, Delia's future, maybe." He hesitated. "Maybe our future, if that's what you want." Victoria thought of the lonely cabin in the woods, of the man who had saved them from the blizzard and carried them both to safety, of the protector who had just freed them from Morton's shadow. A man who read poetry by firelight and looked at stars with wonder still in his eyes despite all he had seen and lost. "I think," she said slowly, "that I'd like to find out what that future might look like. Together." Daniel's smile deepened as he lowered his head, hesitating just a breath away from her lips. Victoria closed the distance between them, her heart soaring as their lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long, cold journey. Spring came to Nevada City with an explosion of wildflowers and new beginnings. The Holloway millinery thrived, with Victoria quickly becoming indispensable to the business and Delia showing remarkable talent for design. Daniel divided his time between his cabin, where he was building an addition, and Nevada City, making the journey at least twice a month. Each visit was longer than the last, his reluctance to leave growing more obvious. On a particularly beautiful April day, with the dogwoods in bloom and the air sweet with promise, Daniel took Victoria riding along a creek outside town. They dismounted in a small meadow, spreading a blanket for a simple picnic. "I have something to show you," Daniel said after they had eaten, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a folded paper, handing it to Victoria with uncharacteristic nervousness. She unfolded it to find a careful drawing, a floor plan for a house. Larger than his cabin, with multiple rooms and wide windows. "It's beautiful," she said, tracing the lines with her finger. "Are these your plans for the cabin addition?" Daniel shook his head. "No, these are plans for a new house in Nevada City." He took a deep breath. "I've purchased land on the edge of town, close enough that you and Delia could still work at the millinery, far enough out to have some peace and a good-sized garden." Victoria looked up, her heart suddenly racing. "Daniel," He took her hands in his. "I love you, Victoria Everett. These past months have been the happiest of my life since before the war. I don't want to keep saying goodbye every few weeks." He reached into his pocket again, this time withdrawing a simple gold ring. "I want to build this house with you. For you. For us, including Delia if she wishes to live with us. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night." Tears welled in Victoria's eyes as Daniel continued, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. "I know we haven't known each other long in the usual way of counting, but I feel like my soul has known yours forever. Will you marry me, Victoria? Will you make a home with me, have a family with me, grow old with me?" Victoria didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Daniel. Yes to all of it." His face lit with a joy that took her breath away as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I've been carrying it since my first visit after we arrived here, waiting for the right moment." Victoria examined the ring, a simple band with a small pearl, elegant and understated. "It's perfect," she said, then laughed as Daniel pulled her into his arms, lifting her off the ground in his enthusiasm before capturing her lips in a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. The wedding took place in June, a small but joyous affair with Mrs. Holloway acting as Victoria's matron of honor and Delia as maid of honor. The local minister officiated in the town's small church, which was filled with wildflowers Delia had collected that morning. By September, the new house was completed, a comfortable two-story home with a wide front porch and the large windows Daniel had promised. Victoria had never imagined she could be so happy, especially in the garden Daniel had built for her, already producing late summer vegetables and flowers. Delia chose to live with them initially, but eventually moved into the room above the millinery as she took on more responsibility at the shop. At 19, she was blossoming into a confident young woman with a keen eye for fashion and a growing circle of friends. "Mrs. Holloway says I might be ready to become a partner in the business in another year," she announced one Sunday at dinner, her eyes bright with excitement. "She has no children of her own, and she says I have the touch with the designs." "That's wonderful, Del," Victoria exclaimed, genuinely happy for her sister's success. "You've earned it with your hard work." Daniel nodded in agreement, his hand finding Victoria's under the table. "This calls for a celebration, and perhaps an announcement of our own." Victoria blushed as Delia looked between them curiously. "An announcement, your sister," Daniel said, his voice warm with pride, "is going to make me a father come spring." Delia's squeal of delight could probably be heard across Nevada City as she leaped up to embrace them both. "A baby." "Oh, Vicky, that's wonderful. When? How long have you known? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Victoria laughed at her sister's enthusiasm. "April, we think, and we only confirmed it with the doctor yesterday. You're the first to know." As Delia peppered them with questions about names and preparations, Victoria exchanged a loving glance with Daniel. From the depths of a blizzard to the warmth of this home they'd created together, it was a journey neither could have imagined that day he found two half-frozen sisters in the snow. In April of 1870, Victoria gave birth to a son they named Samuel, after Daniel's father. The following year brought another boy, James, and 2 years later, the daughter they had begun to think might never come, Sarah, named for Daniel's first wife with her blessing, Daniel said, as he was certain she would have wanted her memory to live on in their happiness. Life was not without its challenges. The mining economy fluctuated, bringing lean times when Daniel's horse-breaking business slowed. Victoria continued working at the millinery part-time, her skill with customers making her valuable even with children at home. They weathered illness, accidents, and the normal friction that comes with building a life together. But through it all, their love remained constant, deepening with each passing year. On cold winter nights, Daniel would still point out constellations to Victoria from their porch, his arm warm around her shoulders as they remembered the blizzard that had brought them together. And sometimes, when the first snow fell, Daniel would gather his wife in his arms and carry her across the threshold of their home, both of them laughing as he reminded her of the day he had carried two blue-lipped sisters from certain death to the beginning of a love that would last their lifetime. "Was I terribly heavy?" Victoria would tease, her arms around his neck. "Light as a feather," Daniel always replied, his eyes still that same summer blue despite the passing years. "And the most precious burden I ever carried." In the soft glow of their home, surrounded by the family they had built together, Victoria and Daniel Quincy found the peace and happiness that had once seemed impossible, proof that even in the harshest blizzard, love could bloom and thrive, creating warmth that would endure for all the seasons of their lives.